You're in the classroom with Catriona Vo. In the Classroom is a podcast where we talk about all things teaching and learning, education and research. Join me as I sit down with everyday educators and explore what's going on in the field and what this means for sustaining us as teachers in the classroom. Today's special guest is David Chessell. David is an early career primary trained teacher who made the mid-career switch from trade into teaching. Join us in this conversation as we talk about what transitioning into teaching later on feels like, how to navigate the uncertainty of the early years, and how to build relationships with families. David is a member of the Queensland Beginning and Early Career Teacher panel as part of the Queensland College of Teachers. We're so excited to have David on the podcast today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Alrighty, everybody. So today I'm in the classroom with David Chessell. Now, I met David as part of a Queensland Beginning Teacher and Early Career Reference Group as part of the Queensland College of Teachers, and we would discuss all things teaching, education, and policy. Now, David has an incredibly passionate voice in this space, and I'm so excited to have him today on the show. So, David, welcome. Why don't you begin by telling our audience a bit about yourself and what drew you into education?
I'm almost 40 years old, just for some context. I'm 40 next year, and I've had a life in sales and then trade. I've spent the last sort of 10 to 13 years prior to education working in trade, in planning and estimation. And then, the world started to change, if you recall, and my children who were in grade 2 and prep, they suddenly got sent home from school. And school was closed, and I found myself as a 30-something-year-old dad being essentially a stay-at-home teacher, and my business was slowing up because we couldn't get into people's houses, and that's where we worked. I found myself in a very unstructured, uncertain environment, and I think to sort of combat the change, I tried to create structure and routine. And I found myself getting my children to wear their school uniforms, and I packed their school lunch boxes every day, and we had bells. We had school started at 9, and we had playtimes, and we followed a structure. And it was it may have been 10 years. I'm guessing it was 3 months. I think it was more like 3 months, but it certainly felt like 10 years that we were learning at home. And when the kids went back to school, that first day they went back to school, I found myself, questioning why I was not pursuing this. I was really enjoying it. I was enjoying the structure. I was enjoying seeing them learn and being involved with their learning. And then first day back at school for my daughter was a Friday in prep, and she brought home a certificate that said, it was a little twinkle certificate. It was just a piece of paper that the teacher had printed out and cut into quarters, and it said, honorary teacher certificate for families and for teaching their kids at home during the lockdowns. And it was, I picked her up at 3:00, and I took that certificate home, and I jumped on my laptop and I searched teacher degree, because I didn't even know what it was called. I'd only ever been in trade. I'd never had higher education. The university I ended up attending was purely because it was the top click on my Google search. And then, the rest was history. I started studying and got out of the business, and in mid-2023, I got my teacher registration, and here I am 18 months later.
So what was that transition for you like from trade into teaching? How did you find that whole aspect of moving from work back into study, then out into the field again?
I was still heavily involved in the business during my studies, which meant I was, and of course a lot of it was online, because we weren't at the university. So I had the headphones in, and I was present in tutorials while I was running the business, and I was driving trucks while I was trying to listen to, learning about whatever we were learning about at the time. And it was transitioning out of the business into study, particularly when I hadn't been part of any formal education for 15 years. It was really tricky, being a dad and working and studying. And then I went and started knocking on doors at schools for teacher aide jobs, because I thought I had to get, into schools. I had to understand what it was like. And I actually loved uni. I made some great friends through uni that I'm still in touch with now. And then getting into the classroom after study it was the hardest 6 months of my life. The first 6 months, that term 3, term 4 contract in grade 5, not because it was a challenging school. The school was beautiful, and the children were beautiful. It's just I never knew there was a workload like this workload until I got into this industry.
Tell me a bit more about that. What was some of the workload, I guess, heaviness or things that you encountered that you really felt like, hey, I'm really shielded from this when I'm at university, and I didn't really understand that this is everything else in addition to what teachers had to do. Can you unpack that a bit more for me?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot with the prac students that come through our school now. Yeah, it was an analogy that I, would always think about when I first started teaching. There's a scene in a movie. The movie is Inception. There's a scene in that movie where one of the actors, I don't know who it was, had to create a puzzle that took a minute to solve. She only had 10 seconds to make this puzzle. And for me, that was what the job was at the start. It was learning how to only spend 10 seconds of my planning time to produce a minute of teaching time. And I think initially it was minute for minute, it was hour for hour. And certainly in the first few weeks, it was 6 hours of planning for 6 hours of teaching. And as we get better at it, I can sort of have that 10-to-1 ratio. And I'm sure that people have been in the job longer than me have an even better ratio of, planning to outcomes or planning to teaching. So it was almost minute for minute. It took me as long to plan as it did to teach. So they are very long days. Yeah, I think you're so unsure when you go into the classroom. And I think there's that expectation from the community and the families that you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing, and you're a professional and you've been studying for this and you're ready to go. But I think what we do in universities is so different to what we do in the classroom. I think university taught me how to think critically and how to write and how to articulate myself. It certainly didn't. I don't believe it prepared me for that day one or week one or even the hour one. It was tricky in the beginning.
What advice do you have for teachers that are battling that kind of workload and wanting to understand more about, hey, I'm really, struggling right now? What advice would you have for them to manage or cope in the early years?
I think a lot of the pressure would be easier to manage when, beginning teachers or even experienced teachers are, being involved in those first few days or even those first few hours, weeks, months, however long it takes. And I think that the biggest lesson I learned in the beginning, as far as, leaning on my colleagues for help, was I didn't know what to ask. And I think that's such a common problem and I see it in the prac students that we have come through, and I see it in brand new teachers, is we are so overwhelmed. We understand that we need help. We understand that we need the support because we're so uncertain about what we're doing. We just don't know how to put it in the form of a question. So when you have your HODs drop in, or your leaders of learning, or your deputies, or whoever it is that drops in on you on day one, week one, month one, term one, whatever it ends up being, how's everything going? What do you need? I don't think I knew what I needed. I don't think I didn't know how to phrase it in a question. So I think initially we need to perhaps we just share the planning on day one and say, here's my planning. Make sure you're aligned with me, or make sure you're aligned with what we're doing, or this is what I'm teaching this session, or tomorrow we're doing this. And just getting a little bit of, I guess, confidence in those beginning teachers that, okay, what I'm teaching is aligning with the teacher next door, because they may be 3 meters away, but it's a world away, really. When you're not moving between classrooms and you're not working like that, it's a world away. So I think initially that sort of forced support, don't ask me a question, just take this, or have this, or I'm going to tell you this because it's going to help you because you don't know what you need to ask, I think is really beneficial.
Yeah, that reminds me of this piece of work that one of the scholars I think she's in Canberra, Misty O'Donoghue, she talks about teaching being a very complicated profession. You have knowledge about teaching that you got to learn, knowledge about the content, about the learners, about the context, and then about the politics. And the list is just endless. So being able to name what it is that we're struggling with, as you say, if we don't know what it is, how can we name it? I think that is so crucial that we lean on other colleagues to help us articulate, I'm really struggling with I don't know if it's classroom management or the processes of classroom management. Can you please clarify what the guidelines are very early on? So I think you've just unpacked something really helpful there about us teachers getting into the classroom and being able to really draw on that power of collegiality. And so, on that note then, can you tell me a bit about how have you been working with other colleagues at the moment? Or, yeah, what have you been up to at your school and doing?
I'm sure you've heard me say this before, and when we've had our QBEC conversations, I think we are in an industry that values time and values years of service, which makes it difficult for beginning teachers to break in and make an impact and take on those positions that perhaps, we're not ready for in the first 12 months, but after that, maybe, we want to spread our wings a little bit and get involved. I have found myself in that space, and I'm involved in everything I could be involved with at school, every committee and every meeting and every initiative. And I think my impact on the school at the moment, I look at our prac students. I'm very big on that retention. That first 5 years it's tragic that we have 50% retention rate after 4 years at university and X amount of dollars of tuition fees throughout universities to not last that first 5 years. I took my first prac student last term, actually, but I look at our prac students and think, what did I need when I was a prac student from anyone around me? Was it certainty? Was it direction? Was it advice? Was it resources? Was it behavior management strategies? Was it information about the school or about our colleagues or about our leadership or the school's direction? Is it a university thing? Is it the assessments? You unsure of what to collect for your GTPA assessment? Or, what did I need when I was a uni student that I only knew I needed in hindsight? That's a big involvement for me at our school. So I have a lot going on in the wellbeing space and sort of the I guess the student agency and I did a lot of trauma informed practice during university, so I'm involved in that area of the students. As far as my focus right now, it's around our prac students and really making sure they're genuinely supported, not by do you need anything. It's the answer's no. If we ask our prac students, do you need anything? The answer's no. And I learned that early on with our prac students. It's you ask that question, you're asking them to be vulnerable. They don't know you. They're trying to make an impression. They've got this. They don't need help. Just sort of, no, here's the help. You're going to take it. And I'm going to tell you about this or that. And whether you listen to it or you don't, I think it's going to, it's going to, I guess, validate what you're doing and give you some confidence and some reassurance that it is difficult, but, we've all done it. We can support those students through that, the 4 weeks or the 6 weeks or whatever it ends up being.
David, you mentioned that, you're very heavily involved in committees, and I think I hear possibly in leadership at your school and being able to, run a lot of those forums and events and things like that. And you're also part of QBEC as well, and you have quite a voice in this space. What's your advice for, young teachers getting into leadership, or how can they be building a voice in this space, I guess, given that much of the sentiment towards beginning and early career teachers is possibly, you need to have more experience before you can actually start speaking out about some of these issues. What's your position on that, and how would you encourage younger teachers to start building that voice?
You don't necessarily know where your skills lie or what you're even passionate about in the, in getting involved outside of the classroom. And for a lot of people, they don't need to do that. You don't need to come in and be involved with everything. If it's just finding your feet and teaching, do it. If that's what it takes, and if that's where you're comfortable, do it. But for me, with getting involved in different things at school, I don't know what space I want to work in at school unless I try everything. So I'm involved as much as I can, and I take a lot of interest in. I know that the program Canva is becoming very popular at schools, and I love Canva, and I've been a bit of a driving force in making sure that our students are involved with Canva and our teachers are collaborating on Canva, and whether that is a lot of PDs on how to use Canva and teaching teachers that that there's more programs besides PowerPoint to get engagement in the classroom. So I really enjoy that ICT space and sort of making that job easier by learning how to use these new technologies. I think that's a really big one for me from a teacher perspective. From the student perspective, I currently teach year 6. I'm very involved with the up and coming year 5 leaders. So our student leaders, we've just been through, speech preparation and speech writing and, confidence building and getting the kids aligned with sort of creating that best possible chance of making it through to those leadership positions in school. And it puts me in a good position with certainly my colleagues and who I report to, but also it lets the children know that, I mean, the children don't know that I've been working there 6 terms. They don't know that I got my permanency, my full registration, 8 weeks ago. They see you as someone that's going to help them succeed. And I think it's a really good sort of brand to start creating as a teacher at the school.
Yeah, you just touched on aspects of my next question. And I was going to ask you about, what do you think a great teacher looks like?
I think what makes a really good teacher, and where I've felt a bit of success, certainly this year, it's my first full year of teaching, is the relationships I have with the families. I think it's such a tokenistic response to, what should our relationships be like with our families and the parents and the carers and the grandparents and whoever else is at home. I've seen it even in classrooms at my school when we don't have the relationships with the families. It's exhausting. The emails that come through and the follow up and it's unnecessary stress in a high stress setting. I established very early that I'm here for the kids. I'm certainly not here for the money. I think I think we can all agree on that. Not here for the money. I'm not here for the work hours. I'm not here for whatever other ideas people might have, school holidays or whatever it is. I'm here for the child. And as soon as I deviate from having the children as my number one focus, this job is too hard. And I can go work somewhere else where it's less stress and it's less commitment. It's less emotionally taxing. But as long as you're here for the children, I think, you're really going to get passionate about the job. And so what makes a great teacher, or for me, what I think makes a great teacher is certainly relationships with the families, getting the trust of the families, getting them to understand that everything that I do is in the best interest of their children, but also, creating a space where the children are comfortable. My classroom, I have little luxuries that don't cost a lot of money, a mirror and hairbrushes and hair ties, and I have a fruit bowl and, we have a mailbox that the children can send me messages, and we write in our gratitude journals every morning. And, it's just creating a space where the children want to come. I want them to feel that I care about them and then they're not just a number and they're going to pass through and then I'll get the next group of kids. I want to promote their agency, and I want them to understand that, it's more than chalk and talk. It's, we're there doing this together, and I care about them and they know about me, and I'm, I talk about my life and my children, and yeah.
I just want to go back to that whole idea about family partnerships, because I feel like for a lot of new teachers, that is something that, like, even now, parts of me, I can be afraid of that. Like, how do I talk to parents? What happens if a parent is just like completely, I don't know where this conversation could go. There are fears, worries, anxieties within parent conversations that I feel like we should unpack. So in terms of building relationships with families, what's the best way to do that? Like, a lot of schools might have, hey, we're going to send out an email at the start of the year to all families, and then we'll just check in every now and then. Do you think it's better to have a more, proactive approach to families? What might that look like in terms of building that relationship with them?
So early on in the career, I was invited to sit in on some parent-teacher interviews right at the end of my degree, because I was working as a teacher aide, and I listened to the conversations quietly in the corner as prac students do, or university students do, or teacher aides do. And I thought, I can wear both hats. I can be a teacher and I can be a parent. And as a parent, when I walk into a classroom to have my 9-minute meeting with the teacher twice a year, I don't care that my son struggles to write conjunctions in his sentences or varying adjectives for meaning in his short story writing. I want to know that my son is happy at school, and I want to know that he feels safe at school, and that he can trust the people around him at school, and that he wants to be at school. I don't care about all of those little things about how those particulars in the classroom. I just want to know that he's okay, and if there's any problems. And I think a lot of us teachers, we jump to those things because that's what we know and that's what we're good at and that's what we can assess, and that's how we quantify the outcomes of the students. When I have my parent teachers and in my meetings with the families, I leave that to the end, and half the time they don't even want to know, but they don't. It's not that they don't care, it's just not the priority. If we've got 10 minutes with these people and the next one's waiting at the door, they need to know that the child's okay and their child's safe and their child's happy, because that's what matters. So my meetings, any conversation that I have with the families, it's even when it's not positive, even if it's I have to report on something that's that's not working in the classroom, we can still spin it in a way that as I said to you at the start of the year, I'm here for your kid, and every decision I make and every action I take, it is because I want the best outcomes for your child. And if they trust me on that, then they know that whatever's coming next is in the best interest of their child. So certainly my meetings with the families, they're not conventional. We have a chat about friendships and what's happening at home, and are we getting enough sleep, and what are we interested in. And I say to them a lot. I use a lot of analogies, maybe because I'm old, and that's what I like to do. But for a long time, they're called cichlids, fish, discus, and I had an aquarium at home, and it wasn't about the fish, it was about the water, and it was about the aquarium, it was about the environment. And I didn't keep fish, I kept a fish tank. And if the fish tank was thriving, the fish would thrive. And that's the environment that I create at school is we look after the aquarium, and our little fish thrive. And so I guess my advice in that respect, or my thoughts in that area is, build the trust early, and be genuine. I've no problem calling families and saying, hey, I moved your kid to the front row because they were being really annoying. And they get it. They understand. It's I might send a dozen emails and make a dozen phone calls to a family throughout the year, and 10 of them might be really positive, and 2 of them might be tough conversations. But they know it's in their child's best interest, and that makes it really, really easy for me when they trust you.
It's incredible just hearing your heart for teaching and all of the advice and guidance that you have. It's actually really helpful for me. I know I'm in a completely different context to you. I'm in a secondary context, but everything that you said just goes back to the heart of what we need to know as good teachers, and how we need to, relate to others and build that relationality as the number one priority in our classroom. And I love the fish tank analogy. Please don't ever stop talking in analogies because it makes sense. Um, to close off this episode, I guess, David, this might be a personal question, but what is it that keeps you going in this field? Amongst all of the things that we have to deal with, change after change, policy after policy, burnout after, negativity, there are so many things that can drive teachers out. But what keeps you in it for another day?
Look, in university, I spent a lot of time working in a domestic violence shelter. And I worked with kids who hated men and didn't trust men, and connecting with the kids, and building that confidence and building that connection. And what keeps me going is seeing these kids at the start of the year that come in, and the only relationship I've ever had with them is buddy classes. They get sent to me when they're naughty because I've got a beard and I'm bald and I'm old, and I can yell at them when they come into my room because they've been naughty, and I can sit them in the corner, and then everyone feels like they've had a win. Most of these kids, that was the only relationship I had. They'd come into my room at the start of the year, and I remembered them from the previous year because I used to get them in trouble. And watching those children grow from the start of the year to where they are now, and hearing from families as recently as last week, that before my son was in your class, he was on a behavior card, and And it just blows my mind that we don't get to the root of we don't get to the root of the success, and what works is just the relationships with the kids, and forming that trust and forming that safe space. So what keeps me going is not the day by day growth, but just the growth in general of the children, and seeing where they've come from and where they are now. And it's just, it is so fulfilling for me to be in a job where the driver isn't money. The driver is outcomes. It's children, it's love, it's happiness.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In the Classroom. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, rate me 5 stars, and leave a review. Don't forget to share this episode with anyone who might find it inspiring. That's all from me, and I'll see you next episode. Thanks for listening to In the Classroom.